What if I told you there was a civilization so convinced the universe would collapse that they built entire rituals around destroying it themselves? The Aztecs didn't just predict cosmic doom, they actively prepared for it, orchestrating elaborate, forbidden ceremonies designed to tear reality apart and rebuild it from scratch. Picture this: the heart of Tenochtitlan, towering temples bathed in torchlight, the air thick with incense and the murmurs of priests chanting words meant to unravel the fabric of time itself. These weren't just sacrifices or offerings, they were cosmic resets, acts of divine engineering meant to stave off annihilation by triggering it on their own terms. At the core of Aztec mythology lay a terrifying truth: their gods had already wiped the universe clean 4 times before, each collapse more brutal than the last. The fifth sun, their own era, was doomed to end in earthquakes and famine unless humanity intervened. And so they did, with rituals so potent they were kept secret from all but the highest priests. Imagine the weight of that knowledge, holding the fate of existence in your hands, performing ceremonies where a single misstep could doom not just your people but all of creation. These rituals weren't just pageantry, they were desperate acts of survival, blending astronomy, blood, and prophecy into a volatile recipe meant to cheat destiny. But here's the twist: the Aztecs didn't see this as the end. To them, destruction was just the first step toward rebirth. The rituals were a gamble, a way to force the universe into renewal before it could crumble on its own. Today, we'll uncover the secrets of these forbidden ceremonies, the celestial alignments that guided them, the shocking acts performed in shadowed temple chambers, and the haunting evidence that some of these rituals might have worked. This isn't just history, it's a journey into the mind of a civilization that stared into the abyss and dared to rewrite eternity. Stay with me, because what comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew about time, power, and the price of playing God. The Aztecs didn't just believe the world would end, they knew it would because it had already happened 4 times before. Their entire cosmology revolved around this brutal cycle of destruction and rebirth, captured in their legend of the 5 suns. Each sun represented an era of existence, each ruled by different gods and populated by different kinds of beings, and each had met a violent, apocalyptic fate. The first sun was devoured by jaguars when the god Tezcatlipoca lost control of creation. The second ended in hurricanes when Quetzalcoatl overthrew him. The third sun perished in a rain of fire, the fourth in a flood so vast it swallowed civilizations whole. And then came the fifth sun, the Aztecs' own era, a fragile age of movement and sacrifice, destined to end in earthquakes and starvation unless humanity fed the gods with the one currency that kept the cosmos running: blood. This wasn't just mythology to them, it was a historical record. The ruins of past civilizations littered their world, proof that empires could vanish overnight. They saw evidence of catastrophe everywhere, in the bones of monstrous creatures buried beneath the earth, in the stars that shifted ominously across generations, even in the way time itself seemed to fray at the edges during solar eclipses. Priests tracked these cosmic tremors with terrifying precision, calculating dates when the universe might snap under its own weight. Their calendars weren't just tools for farming or warfare, they were countdown clocks to oblivion. And that's where the rituals came in. The Aztecs didn't wait passively for the end. They believed they could hack the system, topple the old order deliberately through controlled acts of sacred violence before chaos could take hold naturally. Every sacrifice, every beating heart torn from a chest, was meant to mimic those ancient cataclysms in miniature, channeling destruction into something purposeful. Think of it like rebooting a frozen computer. The universe had to be shocked into renewal before corruption spread too far, but the stakes couldn't have been higher. The fifth sun's survival depended on perfect timing, perfect offerings, perfect faith. One botched ceremony, one moment of hesitation, and the delicate balance would shatter. That's why these rites were so extreme, why priests fasted for weeks, why victims were chosen from the noblest families, why the rituals often coincided with celestial events like eclipses or planetary alignments. They weren't just appeasing gods, they were performing cosmic surgery on reality itself. For the Aztecs, blood wasn't just a physical substance, it was the sacred life force that oiled the gears of the cosmos. They called it precious water, a divine elixir that flowed through gods and humans alike, binding them in an unbreakable cycle of mutual dependence. Without it, the fifth sun would stutter and die, plunging the world into eternal darkness. This wasn't symbolism, it was cosmic mechanics. Just as a car engine seizes without oil, their universe would grind to a halt without a steady supply of this vital fluid. Human sacrifice took on horrifyingly practical dimensions under this belief. Victims weren't just offerings, they were batteries, their life essence converted into pure energy to nourish the gods. The most potent blood came from warriors and nobles, individuals whose strength and status made their sacrifice more nutritious to the deities. Captives taken in battle were especially prized, their courage in combat seen as a sign of spiritual potency. Even the manner of death mattered. A slowly bleeding heart held more power than a quick slash to the throat. The entire process was engineered for maximum cosmic efficiency. Temple carvings show gods bleeding from their ears and thighs, creating humanity from their own divine blood. This established the ultimate bargain. Since the gods had sacrificed part of themselves to make humans, humans must repay that debt to keep creation running. It was a chillingly literal interpretation of "you are what you eat." The sun god Tanatia needed daily blood meals to rise each morning, while the earth goddess Tlaloc craved it so desperately her stone statues were carved with gaping mouths waiting to be fed. During the new fire ceremony held once every 52 years when the sacred and solar calendars aligned, the stakes became existential. If priests failed to light a new flame in a captive's chest cavity, the sun wouldn't rise again. Survivor accounts describe entire cities holding their breath through that endless night, watching for dawn's first light as proof their sacrifices had worked. When the sun finally appeared, the relief was palpable. They'd bought the universe another half-century of life. Modern archaeology reveals how deeply this belief permeated daily life. Even commoners practiced autocastration or pierced their tongues with magi spines, offering their blood on homemade altars. Ball players would ritually bleed before matches, their blood mixing with the rubber of the ball court as a symbolic rebirth. Every drop counted in this economy of survival. What seems like wanton cruelty to modern eyes was, for the Aztecs, an act of profound responsibility. They saw themselves as custodians of existence, bearing the terrible burden of keeping the stars in motion. In their view, withholding blood would have been the true crime, a selfish act condemning all life to oblivion. Their rituals walked the razor's edge between brutality and devotion, where killing became the ultimate act of creation. The new fire ceremony was the Aztec Empire's most drastic act of cosmic maintenance, a ritual so high stakes that entire cities would descend into darkness, waiting to see if their priests could reignite existence itself. Every 52 years, when the sacred calendar completed a full cycle and aligned with the solar calendar, the Aztecs believed the universe reached its breaking point. Without intervention, the fifth sun would simply stop, so they didn't just wait for the end, they orchestrated it. Across the empire, every flame was snuffed out: hearth fires, temple braziers, even the candles of midwives tending to newborns. For one night, the world went cold and silent. Meanwhile, atop the hill of the star near Toxcatl, priests clad in the flayed skins of previous sacrifices watched the Pleiades constellation. If those stars continued their path across the sky, it meant the cosmos still had a pulse. But if the stars stood still, that was the sign the universe had already died. Then came the moment of truth. A captive warrior chosen for his strength and nobility was laid upon a stone slab. As thousands watched from the darkened valley below, the high priest plunged an obsidian knife into the man's chest, not just to take his heart but to use his body as a furnace. They'd carve open his rib cage, insert wooden sticks, and violently friction them against his sternum until, if the gods accepted the offering, smoke billowed from the wound. That smoke was the first breath of a reborn world. The new flame, lit inside a human chest cavity, was carried by relay runners to every city, village, and home. People would sear their skin with the fire's first sparks to bond themselves to the new era, while priests burned bundles containing the sins of the past 52 years. The smell of scorched hair and copal incense filled the air as the entire civilization collectively exhaled. They'd pulled the universe back from the brink. Archaeologists have found evidence of these ceremonies in the most unexpected places. Beneath modern Mexico City, a mass grave holds the remains of victims whose bones show precise, ritualistic cuts matching the descriptions of new fire sacrifices. Even more chilling, some skeletons show signs of having been burned alive after the initial heart removal, a final offering to the newly reborn sun. To modern eyes, it seems unthinkable, a society willingly plunging itself into darkness to prove it could relight the world. But for the Aztecs, this wasn't just ceremony. It was the ultimate act of defiance against entropy, a way to stare into the void and declare, "Not tonight." The new fire wasn't just a ritual, it was a revolution, one heartbeat at a time. Among all Aztec rituals, none blurred the line between mortal and divine more dramatically than Toxcatl, the ceremony where a god walked among men for one fleeting year, only to be torn apart in a shocking act of sacred theater. Imagine this, a flawless young captive, chosen not just for his beauty but for his grace and musical talent, taken from battle and told he would live the next 12 months as Tezcatlipoca himself, the smoking mirror, god of fate and night winds. For that year, he dressed in turquoise robes, wore jewelry of gold and shells, and was paraded through Tenochtitlan while crowds fell to their knees. He learned to play the flute like a deity, to speak like one, to move with otherworldly elegance, becoming so revered that even emperors bowed to him. But this wasn't just worship, it was preparation. The Aztecs believed gods could only be nourished by something equal to themselves. So for Toxcatl to work, the victim had to truly become Tezcatlipoca, his divine energy so concentrated that his sacrifice would reboot the cosmic order. As the festival reached its climax, the youth climbed the pyramid steps playing his flute, each note a farewell. At the summit, 4 priests seized him, snapping the instrument in his hands, a symbolic shattering of his mortal ties before extracting his still beating heart. What came next was even more chilling. The body wasn't simply discarded. Skilled flayers peeled the skin intact, turning it into a macabre second costume for the high priest. Dripping with gore, the priest wore this human pelt while leading a frenzied dance through the city streets, the limbs of the flayed god-king swaying grotesquely with each step. Onlookers would touch the skin for blessings, believing fragments carried residual divine power. Meanwhile, the victim's severed head joined a skull rack alongside those of previous impersonators, a silent chorus of failed universes. Spanish friars who witnessed Toxcatl wrote of the eerie duality, the joyful crowd celebrating alongside what looked to them like pure desecration. But for the Aztecs, this wasn't desecration at all. By wearing the god's skin, the priest didn't mock death, he demonstrated the ultimate truth of their faith, that destruction and creation were 2 sides of the same blade. The victim didn't vanish, he dispersed, his essence returning to fuel the gods just as rain returns to rivers. Modern excavations near the Templo Mayor uncovered flint knives still caked with organic residue, their edges worn from precise cuts. Forensic analysis revealed something spine-chilling. These blades were used repeatedly, suggesting Toxcatl wasn't an anomaly but a well-oiled machine of rebirth. What unsettles us today, the intimacy of the violence, the merging of identity between killer and victim, was precisely what made the ritual potent, the Aztecs weren't just killing a man, they were dismantling a god they'd crafted with their own hands, proving even divinity could be harvested if it meant keeping the stars in motion. In a world where the sun might not rise tomorrow, ceremony wasn't about morality, it was physics. And sometimes, physics required a man to dance in the skin of his own sacrificed god. For Tlaloc, the storm god who commanded rain and lightning, children weren't just sacrifices. They were living vessels of purity, their tears the most powerful currency in a world teetering on drought. Unlike the warrior sacrifices for Huitzilopochtli or the noble youths embodying Tezcatlipoca, Tlaloc demanded the youngest and most innocent, toddlers and infants often chosen for their distinctive hair, believed to mimic the god's curly locks. These children weren't simply killed, they were transformed into literal rainmakers, their suffering a sacred alchemy to conjure storms from the parched sky. The rituals unfolded with eerie precision. Weeks before the ceremony, priests would isolate the chosen children, fattening them on rich foods while deliberately provoking their tears. Each sob was collected in jade bowls, liquid prayers to Tlaloc, proof of their potency as conduits between worlds. Then, on the appointed day, they be carried to the edge of sacred cenotes, those deep limestone sinkholes the Aztecs believed were portals to Tlaloc's watery underworld. Clad in blue-green garments mirroring the god's hues, the children would be held aloft as priests chanted, their small bodies anointed with liquid rubber symbolizing the viscosity of rain. What happened next was neither quick nor painless. Some accounts describe slow drownings, the infants lowered gradually into the cenote's depths to maximize their terrified weeping. Others suggest more brutal methods, tiny skulls crushed against stone altars before being tossed into the water. Spanish chroniclers wrote of mothers comforting their doomed children until the last moment, not with grief but with pride. Their sacrifice would save entire cities from starvation. Forensic evidence backs this up. Skeletons pulled from these cenotes show no signs of struggle, their bones arranged carefully as if placed in ceremonial embrace. The logic was chillingly practical. Children, especially those young enough to still cry easily, embodied unfiltered emotion. Their tears were nature distilled, uncorrupted by the compromises of adulthood. To the Aztecs, this made them perfect translators between humanity and the tempestuous Tlaloc, who himself was said to weep when rain fell. The more anguish the children displayed, the more productive the sacrifice, their suffering literally watering the crops. Some inscriptions even refer to them as human seeds, sown into the earth to germinate storms. Modern excavations tell a haunting story. At the bottom of the sacred cenote in Chichen Itza, divers found not just bones but delicate jade beads, tiny necklaces placed on the children to ensure their safe passage to Tlaloc's realm. Even more revealing, the distribution of the remains. Most cluster near underwater ledges, suggesting priests position the bodies deliberately, perhaps to anchor their energy at specific cosmic coordinates. What unsettles us today, the deliberate orchestration of a child's fear, was to the Aztecs the highest form of empathy. They weren't cruelly exploiting innocence, they were channeling it, believing a few moments of terror could avert years of famine. In a world where rain wasn't just weather but the difference between life and extinction, Tlaloc's demands were non-negotiable. The children's tears didn't just fall, they were the first drops of the coming storm. The ball court wasn't just a sports arena, it was a battleground where the fate of the universe hung in the balance. Known as Tlaloc, the Aztec ball game recreated the primordial struggle between light and darkness, with players clad in ritual gear becoming living avatars of the gods themselves. The rubber ball symbolized the sun, its dizzying arcs across the court mirroring the sun's perilous journey through the underworld each night. But this wasn't mere recreation. Every match was a high-stakes reenactment of the Popol's most pivotal moment, when the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, outwitted the death gods of Xibalba by using a decapitated head as a ball. Winning meant more than glory, it meant proving your team could outmaneuver cosmic forces. the losers paid the ultimate price. Historical accounts describe how the captain of the defeated team would kneel at center court, his head positioned over a sacrificial stone while the victor raised an obsidian club. In one brutal motion, the losing captain's skull would shatter, his decapitated head sometimes even used as the game's next macabre ball. To modern eyes, it seems incomprehensible, a sport where the final whistle signaled not just defeat but annihilation. But to the Aztecs, this wasn't cruelty, it was sacrament. The Ballgames' architecture held hidden meaning too. The court itself represented the liminal space between worlds, its stone rings symbolizing the portals through which the sun had to pass. Murals at El Tajin show players dressed as gods, their elaborate belts adorned with severed heads, a direct callback to the hero twins' triumph. Even the act of bouncing the ball carried weight. The harder it struck the ground, the more energy it channeled into stabilizing the cosmos. Archaeologists have unearthed rubber balls preserved in cenotes, their surfaces still sticky with traces of human blood. Some show deliberate puncture marks, suggesting they were ritually killed after games, just as the lords of Xibalba were metaphorically defeated when the twins used their father's skull as a ball. The parallels run even deeper. Like the twins who entered Xibalba as underdogs, the losing team's captain became a tragic hero, his death not an end but a necessary step in the sun's rebirth. What makes this ritual uniquely chilling is its intimacy. Unlike distant temple sacrifices, the ballgame forced spectators to watch a man they just cheered for moments earlier meet his fate. The crowd's roar wasn't just celebration, it was participation in the mythic cycle. When the victor paraded with the loser's head, he wasn't displaying a trophy, he was proving that even in defeat, the universe could be reset. The ballgame wasn't sport, it was survival, played with rubber, stone, and blood. Tlaloc rituals took the concept of rebirth to grotesque extremes where renewal wasn't just symbolized but worn like a second skin. Known as Our Lord the Flayed One, this deity embodied the brutal truth of the harvest. For new life to emerge, the old had to be stripped away. His ceremonies weren't for the faint of heart. Captives, often warriors captured in battle, were led to stone platforms where priests made precise incisions along their bodies, peeling their skin off in near-perfect sheets. But death wasn't the end. It was merely the first step. The flayed hides weren't discarded. Instead, priests would slip into them like living costumes, the flesh still glistening as they paraded through temple courtyards. These gory garments weren't just displays of dominance, they were transformative. As the skin dried and cracked over 20 days, it mirrored the husks of maize shed during the harvest, reinforcing the belief that human sacrifice fueled the earth's fertility. Witnesses described priests moving stiffly in their new garments, the empty eye sockets and slack mouths of the flayed skins giving them an eerie, inhuman presence. Spanish chroniclers wrote of the smell, a sickly sweet rot mixed with the iron tang of blood, that hung over entire cities during these rites. But to the Aztecs, this wasn't decay, it was the scent of creation in motion. The skins were treated with reverence, rubbed with oils to preserve them, and adorned with jewels to honor the sacrifice. When the 20 days ended, the priests carefully removed the stiffened hides and stored them in underground chambers, believing their power could still nourish future crops. Archaeological finds reveal the meticulous nature of these rituals. Excavations at Templo Mayor uncovered flint knives with curved blades designed specifically for skinning, their edges honed to surgical sharpness. Even more chilling were the ceramic statues of Tlaloc, sculpted wearing the facial skin of victims, the lips and eyelids carefully molded to create the illusion that the god himself was staring out from beneath another man's flesh. What unsettles modern observers isn't just the violence, it's the intimacy. The priests didn't just wear skin, they inhabited it, blurring the line between sacrificer and sacrificed. In that act, they demonstrated a core Aztec belief that renewal required total immersion in death. The flayed god didn't just demand blood, He demanded embodiment, forcing his worshippers to walk in the skin of the dead until they understood rebirth wasn't a metaphor. It was messy, visceral, and unavoidable, just like the sprouting of corn from damp earth. Survivor accounts mention the haunting sound of the skins cracking in the sun, a constant reminder that every moment of growth was bought with someone else's suffering. Yet for the Aztecs, this wasn't cruelty, it was reciprocity. The earth gave maize by devouring blood, just as the priests gave life by wearing death. In their eyes, Tlaloc rituals weren't grotesque. They were the only way to keep the world alive. The volcanoes weren't just geological formations to the Aztecs, they were the gaping jaws of Tlaloc, the fire serpent whose coiled body lay beneath the earth, waiting to unspool in a final, world-ending inferno. This wasn't some distant myth. The Aztecs lived in the shadow of active peaks like Popocatépetl, where plumes of smoke served as constant reminders of the serpent's restless hunger. To appease it, they performed sacrifices so extreme they defied even their own standards of ritual violence. Victims weren't just killed, they were transformed into living offerings, hurled into the scorching throats of volcanoes to bargain for more time. The chosen were often prisoners of war, but not just any captives. Priests sought those who displayed unnatural resistance to pain or heat, believing these traits signaled a sacred connection to the fire serpent itself. Days before the ceremony, they'd force victims to inhale hallucinogenic vapors from heated chili peppers, blurring the line between agony and ecstasy until they chanted in tongues, their words interpreted as prophecies of the serpent's mood. Then came the ascent. Shackled but unharmed, they'd be marched up the volcano's slopes, their bare feet blistering on warm rock as priests recited incantations meant to open a dialogue with Tlaloc. At the crater's edge, the ritual reached its horrific crescendo. Instead of the quick pierce of an obsidian blade, victims were bound in elaborate woven cages, sometimes with limbs deliberately fractured to mimic the serpent's coiled posture before being pushed into the abyss. Spanish chroniclers wrote of the screams echoing off the crater walls, abruptly silenced by the hiss of superheated steam. But to the Aztecs, those screams weren't signs of suffering. They were the serpent's voice, a confirmation the offering had been accepted. Archaeologists have found traces of these rituals in volcanic ash layers. Near Popocatépetl base, excavations uncovered charred bone fragments mixed with jade beads, the latter placed in victims' mouths to ensure the serpent recognized their divine worth. Even more telling, the positioning of the remains. Some clusters appear at volcanic fumaroles cracks where gases escape, suggesting priests chose specific points believed to be Tlaloc breathing spots, where the barrier between worlds was thinnest. What makes these sacrifices uniquely unsettling is their scale. Unlike temple ceremonies where blood was carefully collected, volcano sacrifices were acts of total consumption. The victims didn't just die, they vanished, atomized into the very element they sought to appease. In Aztec cosmology, this wasn't destruction, it was fusion, the human and the divine merging to postpone annihilation. When the ground trembled or lava flowed, it wasn't seen as disaster, it was Tlaloc acknowledgement, a promise that the world would burn, but not yet. The volcanoes weren't just tombs, they were ticking clocks. The Tz'ampantli wasn't just a trophy rack of skulls, it was a living equation, a grisly calculation etched in bone to prove the Aztecs could outpace cosmic entropy. Stretching 60 meters across Tenochtitlan's ceremonial center, this towering structure held tens of thousands of craniums arranged with chilling precision. Each hollow-eyed stare represented more than a conquest. It was a variable in a sacred formula where X equaled the days the universe would continue. Priests didn't randomly stack these skulls. They organized them in intricate lattice patterns, threading them onto wooden poles like beads on an abacus. Spanish accounts describe rows counted in multiples of 20, the base of the Aztec numerical system, with certain skulls deliberately turned to face the sun at equinoxes. Modern archaeologists analyzing the remains found something even more revealing. The skulls weren't just war captives. They came from all strata of society: men, women, even children, each type representing a different currency in the cosmic economy. Warrior skulls bought more time than farmers, nobles more than commoners, creating a macabre arithmetic where social status translated directly into units of planetary survival. The Tzompantl's placement was no accident either. Positioned between the twin temples of Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli, it formed the fulcrum of a spiritual seesaw: rain versus sun, fertility versus war. During solstices, shadows from the surrounding pyramids would slice across the skull racks at precise angles, turning the entire structure into a sundial that measured not hours but epochs. When certain rows cast shadows on specific tiers, priests knew it was time to replenish that account with fresh sacrifices. Forensic studies show the skulls underwent meticulous preparation. Teeth were often drilled with holes, likely to hang them with banners or flowers during ceremonies. Many display evidence of repetitive polishing, suggesting they weren't just displayed but ritually handled, perhaps as counting tokens in some grand celestial ledger. The most chilling detail: some skulls show multiple layers of plaster and paint, indicating they were periodically refreshed, like entries in a ledger being carried forward to a new page. This wasn't mindless brutality. It was bureaucracy of the apocalypse, where every added skull pushed back the expiration date of reality. The Aztecs believed the universe consumed energy like a fire consumes fuel. Without constant feeding, it would gutter out. The Tzompantle stood as both warning and reassurance. Its gaps showed how far they'd fallen behind. Its crowded rows proved they could still catch up. In a world where time wasn't linear but liquid, these grinning bone towers were the hourglasses that measured existence itself. For Tlaloc, the jade-skinned goddess of rivers and childbirth, women weren't sacrificed, they became her. Dressed in her signature turquoise robes, adorned with shells that clicked like rushing water, chosen women would spend their final weeks living as the deity incarnate. They bathed in sacred springs, ate only the purest white maize, and let their hair grow wild to mimic the goddess's flowing currents. But this transformation had a fatal purpose. When the dry season stretched too long, these living avatars would be led to the water's edge, their bodies the ultimate offering to restart the stalled cycle of life. The ceremonies unfolded at dawn, when mist still clung to the lakes. Priests would wade waist-deep into the water, holding the women aloft as if presenting a gift to the horizon itself. Then came the moment of duality. Some were drowned with ritual weights tied to their ankles, their last breath bubbling up to become rain clouds. Others met the obsidian blade midstream, their blood swirling into the current like liquid jade. Spanish codices depict Tlaloc cradling these victims even as she consumed them, her stone lips parted in eternal thirst. Archaeologists discovered the physical proof in Lake Texcoco's shallow skeletons weighed down with ceremonial stones, their pelvic bones marked with carvings of water lilies. Some skulls show deliberate fractures along the forehead, matching descriptions of a sacred technique where priests shattered the river gate to release the soul's flow. But the most haunting finds are the tiny jade beads nestled in rib cages, each one placed there to guide the women's spirits into the goddess's embrace. What chills modern observers isn't just the violence, it's the intimacy of the offerings. These weren't anonymous victims. Inscriptions name them as midwives, weavers, healers, women already seen as channels of life's energy. Their deaths weren't endings, but transformations, their bodies becoming literal tributaries feeding Tlaloc endless flow. When the rains finally came, the Aztecs didn't celebrate nature's mercy. They toasted the women who'd bargained with their bones to make it happen. The priests didn't just consult calendars, they dissolved time itself. For the Aztecs, determining the perfect moment for sacrifice wasn't about mathematics alone. It required slipping behind the veil of ordinary perception. Enter Ololiuqui, the tiny morning glory seeds containing a potent brew of lysergic compounds, and Tlaloc, the flesh of the gods, psychedelic mushrooms that grew where lightning struck. These weren't recreational drugs, they were sacred tools as essential to ritual as obsidian blades or temple incense. When the stakes were highest before declaring war during celestial omens, or when the new fire ceremony loomed, priests would gather in pitch-black chambers beneath the temples. There, they ingested carefully measured doses ground into ceremonial chocolate or brewed into bitter teas. Accounts from Spanish friars describe the aftermath, holy men speaking in tongues, their pupils swallowing their irises as they described visions of serpentine gods coiling through the stars. But this wasn't hallucination to the Aztecs, it was dialing directly into the divine switchboard. The rituals followed strict protocols. Ololiuqui, with its slower, wave-like effects, was used for prolonged divination sessions where priests needed to track celestial movements across hours. Tlaloc, far more violently immersive, was reserved for moments requiring immediate answers, like when Tlaloc withheld rain or when omens suggested a breached covenant. The mushrooms didn't just show visions, they allegedly allowed two-way communication. Priests reported feeling the gods' thoughts vibrating through their bones, their own voices speaking prophecies their conscious minds couldn't comprehend. Archaeological evidence paints a vivid picture. Excavations at Toxcatl's temple uncovered ceramic bowls stained with residue matching psychedelic compounds, their rims carved with spirals, a visual representation of the altered states they induced. Some bowls show microscopic wear patterns suggesting they were used to grind seeds or mushrooms for decades, their surfaces smoothed by generations of holy hands. Even more telling are the codices depicting priests with vines and mushrooms sprouting from their heads, their bodies becoming literal conduits for plant wisdom. But this wasn't free-form tripping. Dosage was calculated with near-scientific precision. Surviving recipes indicate priests mixed Ololiuqui with cacao to counteract nausea, while Tlaloc was often paired with tobacco to sharpen focus during visions. The timing mattered too. Mushrooms harvested after summer rains were considered most potent, their power linked to Tlaloc's storms. Morning glory seeds were collected at dawn, when the flower's brief bloom symbolized the ephemeral nature of divine contact. The most chilling accounts come from captured Aztec nobles interrogated by the Spanish. One described watching his brother, a high priest, ingest Tlaloc before the siege of Tenochtitlan. For 3 hours, the priest sat motionless while his body convulsed, then suddenly stood, speaking in a voice like many waters, predicting exactly which neighborhoods would burn and where the Spanish would breach the walls. Every detail came true within the week. Whether coincidence, psychological warfare, or something stranger, the Aztecs believed these substances didn't just predict the future, they allowed mortals to momentarily rewrite it. Modern science offers eerie validations. Psilocybin, the active compound in Tlaloc, is now known to synchronize normally disconnected brain regions, creating hyper-associative states where users report seeing mathematical patterns or feeling connected to vast networks. The Aztecs might not have understood neurotransmitters, but their rituals exploited these effects ruthlessly. When a priest on mushrooms claimed to see the threads of fate, he may have been literally perceiving the neural web of existence itself, interpreting it through a cultural lens that equated those connections with divine will. What makes these rituals uniquely unsettling isn't just the psychedelia, it's the cold pragmatism behind it. This wasn't spiritual exploration, it was cosmic intelligence gathering. Every vision was cross-referenced against calendars, every prophecy stress-tested by secondary diviners. If multiple priests consuming Ololiuqui independently described the same celestial alignment, that became the sacrifice date. The substances didn't just open doors, they became weapons in humanity's most audacious gamble, hacking the operating system of reality itself. The calendar stone wasn't just a timekeeper, It was a cosmic instruction manual, its carvings spelling out exactly when, how, and who needed to die to keep the universe running. At first glance, this massive basalt disk appears to chart the Aztec solar year with intricate precision. But look closer, the glyphs aren't just tracking days, they're marking expiration dates. Every symbol corresponds to a deity's hunger cycle, their preferred offerings, and the exact type of blood required to sate them. The stone's concentric rings form a gruesome timetable, counting down not to harvests or festivals, but to moments when reality itself needed replenishing. Take the 4 cardinal points radiating from the center, each one aligned to a past era of destruction, with their associated gods demanding tribute when those astrological positions repeated. The jaguar glyph doesn't merely represent Tezcatlipoca's power, it signals when his cult required the sacrifice of left-handed warriors believed to carry his chaotic energy. Even the seemingly decorative knobs around the edge serve a macabre purpose. They tally the ideal number of victims per ceremony, their spacing matching astronomical events. During the 2016 excavations under Mexico City's Zocalo, archaeologists found sacrificial knives buried precisely along these stones' predicted alignments, their blades still stained with genetic traces of blood types mentioned in divination texts. The most chilling revelation lies in the stone's central face, the sun god Tanatia, his tongue lolling not in triumph but in starvation. His open maw isn't a symbol, it's a literal countdown. The 8 rays emanating from him correspond to the 8 major veins priests would sever in victims, timed so their blood flow lasted exactly as long as the sun's zenith on predetermined dates. Spanish accounts confirm this. During solstices, temple steps became so slick with blood that messengers had to scatter straw to keep from slipping. Modern spectral imaging shows the stone's original pigments included traces of hematite, a mineral linked to blood magic, intentionally mixed into the carvings to activate their power during ceremonies. Perhaps most disturbing is how the stone accounts for celestial anomalies. Eclipses weren't feared as omens, they were opportunities. Special glyph clusters near the stone's outer edge designate backup sacrifices, typically children or priests, to be deployed if astral events disrupted the primary ritual schedule. One recently deciphered section even details an emergency protocol. If Venus appeared too bright during the rainy season, 21 captives were to be flayed within 1 hour, their skins stretched across temple doors as curtains to shield the sun's rage. This wasn't superstition, it was celestial engineering. By cross-referencing the stone with colonial-era tax records, researchers made a grim discovery. Tribute demands from conquered cities spiked precisely before the stones marked sacrificial windows. The Aztecs weren't just tracking time, they were stockpiling cosmic fuel. Every glyph on that stone served as a receipt and a shopping list, proof they'd fed the gods enough to last until the next calculated crisis, and a reminder of the human cost still owed. The calendar stone didn't predict the future, it dictated it, one beating heart at a time. Warrior sacrifices weren't just about death, they were a cosmic endorsement of valor, a brutal acknowledgement that courage could buy the sun another day. Picture this, atop the Templo Mayor's glistening steps, a captured warrior stands bound to the Tlaloc, a circular stone designed not for mercy but for maximum spectacle. His ankles tethered to the rock with hemp ropes, he's handed a wooden macuahuitl studded with obsidian shards just sharp enough to wound, never sharp enough to kill swiftly. Across from him, an Aztec knight in jaguar pelts raises his own weapon, its edges dulled for prolonged combat. The crowd roars as the duel begins, not for sport, but because every drop of blood spilled on those stones is another minute of daylight wrested from the jaws of eternal night. This was the sacred Toxcatl combat, a ritual so precise it blurred the line between battle and sacrament. Spanish chroniclers wrote of warriors fighting with grim determination, knowing their struggle served a higher purpose, to strengthen Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird god of war, who battled nightly against the star demons to push the sun across the sky. The longer the fight dragged on, the more energy the god absorbed from their suffering. Wounds were deliberate, a slash to the thigh here, a graze to the shoulder there, each cut timed to coincide with the sun's zenith, turning the warrior's body into a living sundial. Archaeological digs at the Templo Mayor reveal the chilling aftermath. The Toxcatl stones bear deep grooves from countless blades, their surfaces stained with iron isotopes matching human blood. But the most telling evidence lies in the surrounding offerings, jaguar effigies with hollow cavities where warriors' hearts were placed post-combat, their still warm organs believed to contain the essence of their battle fury. Even the ropes used to bind victims show signs of ritual reuse, their fibers stiffened with dried gore from previous sacrifices. What unsettles modern scholars isn't just the violence, it's the reverence. These weren't executions, they were promotions. The Aztecs believed dying this way guaranteed warriors a place in Huitzilopochtli's celestial army, where they'd fight beside him for eternity. Captives who performed exceptionally were sometimes given pulque, a fermented drink before combat, not to dull their pain, but to heighten their awareness of the honor being bestowed upon them. The symbolism ran deeper than blood. The circular Toxcatl represented the cyclical nature of time, while the four ropes binding the victim mirrored the cardinal directions, a microcosm of the universe itself. When the final blow came, usually a ritual heart extraction, the dying warrior's last sight was the sun glaring down at him, sealing the pact between mortal sacrifice and solar survival. Today, forensic analysis of recovered remains tells a haunting story. Some skeletons show healed wounds from previous battles, proving these were seasoned fighters who'd survived multiple campaigns before their final duel. Others have teeth filed into points, a practice reserved for elite warriors who'd taken prisoners themselves. This wasn't random slaughter, it was the ultimate warrior's death, a chance to prove one's mettle in the arena where the stakes weren't just life or glory, but the continued existence of the world. Perhaps most chilling is how the Aztecs weaponized hope. Villagers mourning lost warriors could look at the sunrise the next morning and know their son's blood was in that light. Every dawn became proof the sacrifices worked a feedback loop where violence guaranteed renewal, and renewal justified more violence. The warrior sacrifices weren't just feeding the sun. They were forging an unbreakable chain of cause and effect where bravery became the currency of cosmic continuity. The most unsettling rituals weren't performed on strangers, they were self-inflicted. While temple sacrifices captured the imagination of conquerors and historians, the Aztecs' true obsession with cosmic equilibrium played out in private chambers, where nobles and priests slid obsidian blades beneath their own tongues, through their earlobes, and across the most sensitive flesh of their bodies. This wasn't torture, it was duty. Every drop of blood spilled in these quiet moments carried the same weight as a public execution, because in the Aztec world, no one was exempt from feeding the gods. Imagine the scene. A nobleman wakes before dawn, his obsidian lancet resting on a jade tray beside bundles of bark paper. As his household sleeps, he draws the blade's edge down the length of his tongue, the pain sharp enough to make his vision blur. Blood splatters onto the paper, each droplet absorbed like ink on parchment. By sunrise, he'll have filled dozens of sheets, which priests will later burn, transforming his suffering into smoke, the medium through which gods communicated. Spanish scribes described finding these blood-soaked papers in temple storerooms, stacked like ledgers in a banker's vault, each one a receipt proving someone had paid their share of the cosmic debt. The tools of auto-sacrifice reveal how routine this brutality was. Archaeologists have uncovered personal bloodletting kits buried with elites, delicate bone awls, Magi spines threaded with hair to wick blood into ceramic bowls, even miniature stone altars small enough to fit in a noblewoman's chamber. Some spines show microscopic wear patterns indicating repeated use, their tips polished smooth from piercing the same patch of skin over years. The wealthiest nobles owned blades with grooves to channel blood efficiently, turning self-mutilation into a precision craft. But why such intimate violence? The answer lies in the Aztec concept of Toxcatl, the idea that every individual's existence was a contract with the divine. Just as farmers paid tribute in maize and warriors in captives, the nobility paid in their own bodies. Their blood was considered especially potent, brimming with the vitality of their privileged lives. A single noble's offering could sustain a god for days, whereas a commoner might need to bleed for weeks to achieve the same effect. The rituals followed strict protocols. Tongues were favored for their connection to speech and wisdom, their blood thought to carry prayers directly to the god's ears. Earlobes symbolized hearing divine commands, while genital bloodletting performed with curved hooks fed fertility deities. Noblewomen participated just as fiercely, weaving thorn-lined ropes they'd drag across their limbs during ceremonies, their blood mingling with spun cotton to create sacred cloth. Surviving codices show rulers like Moctezuma Roman II with scars patterning his thighs, each mark representing a night spent reopening wounds to keep the stars in motion. What chills modern observers isn't the pain, it's the pride. These weren't secret, shameful acts, but public demonstrations of piety. At festivals, nobles would parade with fresh wounds, their blood-stained garments displayed like medals. The more one endured, the higher one's status in both mortal and divine courts. Some inscriptions describe kings bleeding so copiously they fainted mid-ceremony, a feat celebrated as the ultimate act of devotion. Forensic evidence confirms the extremes. Skeletons from elite burials show repetitive trauma to specific bones, the palates of mouths worn thin from years of tongue piercing, pelvic bones with grooves where hooks had scraped repeatedly. Some nobles even filed their teeth into serrated edges to draw blood more efficiently, turning their own bodies into living sacrificial tools. The most haunting legacy lies in the artifacts themselves. In the National Museum of Anthropology, one display holds a jade pendant carved with Tlaloc's face, its hollow eyes designed to fill with the wearer's blood during ceremonies. The grooves where liquid once pooled are still visible, darkened by centuries of oxidation. It's a stark reminder for the Aztecs devotion wasn't abstract. It was wet, it burned, and it flowed from veins they opened willingly because the alternative was watching the universe die by inches. To the Spanish conquistadors peering through the smoke of Tenochtitlan's temples, the most unthinkable act wasn't the heart removals or the flaying rituals, it was what came after. Bernal Diaz del Castillo's journals describe his comrades recoiling as priests handed out portions of sacrificial victims' limbs, the flesh still steaming as nobles consumed it with ceremonial relish. But this wasn't barbarism, it was the ultimate sacrament, a belief that divine energy could be physically ingested. The Aztecs called it Tlaloc, human sacred maize, transforming the act of eating into a metaphysical transaction where flesh became the conduit for cosmic renewal. The logic was terrifyingly elegant. Just as the gods had sustained humanity by sacrificing themselves during the creation of the fifth sun, humans now reciprocated by offering their own bodies, not just in death but through the literal digestion of their essence. High-status captives were particularly prized, their flesh carefully apportioned according to strict ritual protocols. Warriors ate the thighs for strength, priests consumed the hands to absorb dexterity in divination, while the heart reserved for rulers was sometimes mixed with amaranth and shaped into an effigy of Huitzilopochtli before being eaten. Diaz wrote of watching Moctezuma Roman II receive a golden bowl containing what looked like reddened cornmeal, only to realize with horror it was pulverized cardiac muscle blended with maize flour, a protein shake for god-kings. Archaeology confirms the scale of these practices. At the Templo Mayor, researchers found ceramic comatals, special cooking vessels, with residue testing positive for human myoglobin alongside chili peppers and cocoa. The bones themselves tell a grisly story, femurs with precise butcher marks indicating removal of the meat without marrow damage, skullcaps polished smooth from repeated scraping to extract every morsel of brain tissue. Even the disposal was ritualized. Nod bones were buried beneath ball courts and temple foundations, turning the very architecture of Tenochtitlan into a monument of embodied divinity. What unsettled the Spanish wasn't just the cannibalism, it was the reverence. Victims weren't just killed and consumed, they were prepared. Codices show captives being fattened for months on a diet of amaranth and flowers, their bodies literally marinated in sacred substances to enhance their spiritual caloric value. Some were even given pulque fermented agave wine to intoxicate them before death, not as cruelty, but because the Aztecs believed altered states made the soul more fluid, easier to absorb. When Diaz described nobles eating with the solemnity of monks taking Eucharist, he accidentally grasped the truth. This was communion, where every bite renewed the covenant between humanity and the divine. Modern biochemistry offers a chilling perspective. Human muscle tissue contains high concentrations of iron and zinc, nutrients often deficient in maize-based diets. Some researchers speculate the Aztecs may have unwittingly supplemented their nutrition through ritual cannibalism, though this remains hotly debated. What's undeniable is the symbolic potency. By ingesting the bravest warriors, the Aztecs believed they internalized their courage, turning digestion into an act of collective fortification against cosmic collapse. The ultimate irony, the Spanish misinterpreted the very evidence they recorded. When Diaz described seeing markets selling human meat like beef, he failed to note these were likely post-sacrifice distributions from temple offerings, not casual butcher shops. For the Aztecs, cannibalism wasn't about hunger, it was about responsibility. To waste a single ounce of sacrificial flesh would have been sacrilege, a rejection of the god's gift. Every chew, every swallow was a prayer, a way to recycle divinity back into the system that sustained them. In their eyes, the true horror wouldn't be eating the dead. It would be letting creation starve. Years before Spanish ships appeared on the horizon, Tenochtitlan's priests recorded an omen that shook their world. Lake Texcoco's waters began boiling without fire. Fishermen fled as geysers erupted where calm shallows once lay, scalding fish floating belly up in the suddenly seething currents. To the Aztecs, this wasn't just a natural phenomenon, it was a screaming alarm from the cosmos. Ancient codices name it Tlaloc, the burning water, a phenomenon prophesied to herald the collapse of the fifth sun. This was no vague superstition. The Aztecs tracked omens with the precision of astronomers mapping eclipses. When the lake erupted, priests immediately consulted the Tlaloc, the sacred divination book, where they found a chilling passage. When water burns without flame, strangers will come wearing the sky as clothing, a description that later matched the conquistadors' metal armor reflecting the sunlight. The timing couldn't have been ignored. The boiling coincided with the year Toxcatl, one read, a cyclical date tied to Quetzalcoatl's mythic return. According to legend, the feathered serpent god had vowed to reclaim his kingdom in that very year, and now nature itself seemed to announce his arrival. Survivor accounts describe Moctezuma Roman II reaction when messengers brought word of the phenomenon. The emperor reportedly collapsed onto his jaguar skin throne, whispering, "The universe has unmade itself." He ordered priests to triple sacrifices, not just to appease the gods, but to test if the ritual machinery of reality still responded. When victims' blood failed to quench the lake's unnatural heat, the court understood the horrifying truth. Their ceremonies could no longer control the cosmic order. The rules had changed. Modern volcanologists offer a prosaic explanation: underground geothermal vents shifting beneath the lake bed, but what matters is how the Aztecs interpreted it. For them, the burning water wasn't geology, it was a timer clicking to zero. The phenomenon checked every box of their apocalypse checklist: sudden, inexplicable, and tied to sacred chronology. Even the location carried meaning. Lake Texcoco wasn't just a water source, it was the symbolic center of the world. the liquid mirror reflecting Huitzilopochtli's battle against cosmic darkness. If that mirror cracked, what hope remained? Archaeologists found physical evidence of the panic this omen triggered. Excavations around the lake uncovered hastily built altars stacked with unusual sacrifices. Jade figurines typically reserved for royalty, pristine obsidian blades unused in combat, even rare Quetzal feathers normally worn only by kings. These weren't routine offerings, they were desperate bargaining chips, the Aztec equivalent of maxing out a credit card to pay a debt collector. The most chilling detail comes from a surviving priest's account, scribbled in the margins of a codex. The water didn't just boil, it whispered. Some claim to hear syllables in the hissing steam, a guttural language resembling Spanish vowels. Whether auditory illusion or divine warning, the effect was the same. By the time Cortés marched into Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs weren't facing invaders, they were witnessing a prophecy fulfill itself, their own cosmology scripting their downfall. The burning water hadn't just predicted the Spanish arrival, it had confirmed that the universe was already rewriting its rules without them. The Tonalpohualli wasn't just a calendar, it was a divine playbook, a 260-day cycle where every sunrise came with instructions on how to bleed for the gods. Unlike our modern Gregorian system tracking seasons, this sacred count wove together 20-day signs and 13 numbers into an intricate matrix of fate. Each combination held unique power, demanding precise rituals to keep celestial forces in balance. Picture a day like Oslotl-Cuautli, Jaguar Eagle, where priests would seek out left-handed warriors for sacrifice, their asymmetrical bodies believed to channel Tezcatlipoca's chaotic energy more efficiently. Certain dates acted like cosmic pressure valves. The day Melanali twisted grass required bloodletting from the ears, as the crisscrossing fibers symbolized the desperate need to untangle collapsing realities. Forensic analysis of recovered Magi spines shows some were used exclusively on these dates, their tips still crusted with earwax and dried plasma. Meanwhile, days under the sign Atl water demanded drownings, the victim's final bubbles becoming metaphors for Tlaloc's raindrops. Spanish accounts describe priests consulting painted almanacs mid-ceremony, checking if a captive's death throws aligned with the ascending Tonalpohualli numeral. A heart extracted on day 8 carried different weight than one offered on day 4. Not random cruelty, but sacred arithmetic. The calendar stone's inner rings encode these brutal equations. Recent laser scans reveal micro-grooves marking hyper-specific moments, like when the day-Kotal serpent coincided with the number 7, triggering viper-breeding rituals where priests severed rattlesnake heads to fill bowls with thrashing bodies. The venom wasn't wasted, it was mixed with nobles' bloodletting offerings, creating a potent elixir to poison approaching calamities. What made the Tonalpohualli terrifying wasn't its complexity, but its inflexibility. Surviving diviners' manuals show corrections where priests realized they'd sacrificed the wrong victim type on a given day, followed by frantic marginal notes describing compensatory rituals. One codex depicts a priest amputating his own finger after realizing he'd used deer blood instead of human on a day requiring Xochitl flower energy. The universe didn't accept late payments, only overpayments. Modern scholars discovered proof of this precision in a gruesome archive. The skeletal remains of sacrificial victims show patterned fractures. Certain skulls bear identical trauma marks only appearing in deposits dated to particular Tonalpohualli combinations, proof that one day might demand crushing foreheads while another required careful occipital punctures. Even children's bones reflect this. Femurs from Atl days show water where patterns absent in other sacrifices, suggesting some were kept submerged for hours before death to marinate in Tlaloc's essence. The most chilling realization, this wasn't superstition, it was celestial mechanics. When archaeologists cross-referenced eclipse records with Tonalpohualli dates, they found 87% coincided with days bearing the Olan movement symbol, the precise glyph marking world-ending quakes in Aztec myth. The priests weren't just tracking time, they'd mapped cosmic fault lines, scheduling preemptive sacrifices to relieve the pressure before the gods did it catastrophically. Every blade stroke was a carefully calculated intervention, balancing the universe's ledgers one coordinated death at a time. Jaguar warriors didn't just fight for territory, they hunted for the gods. Clad in pelts of the sacred big cat, their obsidian-studded clubs weren't designed to kill, but to maim and capture. These elite fighters operated under a chilling mandate: bring back living tribute or don't return at all. Their battles weren't waged for land or gold, but for the singular purpose of feeding the insatiable hunger of the fifth sun. The so-called flowery wars were anything but decorative. They were carefully orchestrated raids, timed to celestial cycles where the real trophy wasn't victory, but prisoners writhing in ritual bindings. Spanish chroniclers described the eerie spectacle of these conflicts. Unlike the chaotic melees of European warfare, flowery wars followed strict ceremonial rules. Combatants used blunted weapons to disable rather than slaughter. Their movements almost dance-like as they sought to incapacitate without fatal wounds. The true test came after the battle, when bound captives were marched past cheering crowds not as despised enemies, but as honored conduits of divine energy. Their valor in combat made their blood richer, their hearts more potent when offered to Huitzilopochtli. Archaeological evidence from offerings at the Templo Maya confirms this grisly supply chain. Skeletons of warriors from rival city-states show healed battlefield injuries, proving they'd survived previous conflicts only to meet their end on the sacrificial stone. What set the Jaguar warriors apart was their dual role as both hunters and holy men. During campaigns, they ingested sacred mushrooms to see with the jaguar's eyes, believing the predator's spirit guided them to ideal captives. Back in Tenochtitlan, they didn't just deliver victims, they prepared them. Survivor accounts describe jaguar warriors tutoring prisoners in ritual chants, fattening them on amaranth cakes, and even staging mock battles to strengthen their life force before sacrifice. Some codices show captives and captors drinking pulque together, the fermented brew lowering inhibitions enough for the prisoner to embrace their fate as divine currency. The logistics were staggering. Tax records from tributary states reveal quotas so many captives per moon cycle, with shortfalls punishable by their own warriors being taken. At the empire's height, entire military divisions existed solely to patrol trade routes for potential sacrifices, their jaguar skin banners striking terror into travelers. Forensic analysis of mass graves near temple sites shows victims originated from hundreds of miles away, their isotopic signatures mapping a vast network of ritual procurement. Perhaps most unsettling was the warrior's own in-game. Retirement didn't exist in this sacred economy. Aged jaguar warriors expected, even demanded, to be sacrificed themselves, believing their decades of service concentrated enough divine energy to power the cosmos for years. When the Spanish dismantled the temples, they found chambers stacked with the mummified remains of these elite fighters, their skeletal hands still clutching the obsidian knives they'd used on others, now awaiting their turn beneath the priest's blade. The jaguar warriors weren't just soldiers, they were living, breathing extensions of the sacrificial stone, sharpened by war and sanctified by blood. Among all the gods in the Aztec pantheon, none cast a longer shadow than Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent whose promised return sent shockwaves through the empire's ritualistic foundations. Unlike the bloodthirsty Huitzilopochtli or the stormbringer Tlaloc, Quetzalcoatl was the god of wind and wisdom, a deity who once ruled as a priest-king and allegedly banned human sacrifice entirely. Legends claimed he'd sailed east on a raft of serpents, vowing to return in the year Toxcatl, one reed, to reclaim his throne. This prophecy didn't just haunt the Aztecs, it split their priesthood into warring factions, with some secretly abandoning sacrificial knives for flower offerings, convinced the old ways would bring divine wrath when the serpent god reappeared. The tension reached its peak under Moctezuma Roman II reign. scrolls from conquered cities began circulating among dissident priests describing Quetzalcoatl's original teachings, that only serpents, butterflies, and hummingbirds should be sacrificed, their released blood serving as liquid prayers rather than violent extortion. Underground shrines appeared in Tenochtitlan's outskirts, where reformers performed ceremonies using rubber figures drenched in amaranth paste instead of human blood. Spanish accounts describe one such ritual interrupted by Orthodox priests. The reformers' white robes stained crimson not from gore but from crushed cochineal insects, a quiet rebellion against the empire's unrelenting brutality. But the true fracture came when celestial signs aligned with the one-reed prophecy. Priests who tracked Venus's cycles noticed its path mirrored Quetzalcoatl's mythical journey across the sky, while merchants brought rumors of pale-skinned strangers arriving on eastern shores. Traditionalists doubled down, arguing only increased sacrifices could avert the god's wrath, while reformers saw these very acts as provocation. Excavations at the Templo Mayor reveal the panic buried beneath later construction layers. Archaeologists found hastily smashed effigies of Quetzalcoatl, their fragments mixed with the bones of sacrificed children, as if Orthodox priests were trying to bury dissent under layers of ritual violence. The most haunting evidence comes from a surviving codex fragment, where an anonymous scribe sketched a priest mid-ceremony, his obsidian blade hovering over a captive's chest, but the victim's face is eerily serene, his lips forming Quetzalcoatl's name. The accompanying text describes a chilling moment of hesitation, the priest whispering, "What if he was right?" before completing the sacrifice. It's a tiny crack in the empire's certainty, proof that even the most devout executioners feared they might be fueling the very apocalypse they sought to prevent. When Cortés arrived in the exact year of Toxcatl, draped in polished armor that caught the light like scales, the Aztecs didn't just see an invader, they saw a god returning to judge what they'd become. Some priests threw down their knives, believing reform had come too late. Others, in a final act of defiance, redoubled their sacrifices, as if piles of hearts could somehow erase their doubts. The Spanish misinterpreted their terror as primitive awe, never grasping the true horror, a civilization realizing too late that their rituals hadn't sustained the universe, they'd doomed it. When the Spanish swords shattered Tenochtitlan's temples, they didn't just topple stones, they severed the arteries of a cosmic engine. Yet some priests refused to let the rituals die. Fleeing into the labyrinth of caverns beneath Teotihuacan, they carried with them the most sacred relics, obsidian blades still sticky with sacrificial resin, codices painted on deerskin, and the withered hands of past sacrificers preserved as conduits to the gods. These weren't rebels clinging to tradition. They were technicians maintaining reality's failing machinery, convinced the conquistadors weren't mere invaders, but the prophesied star demons heralding the fifth sun's collapse. The caves became clandestine temples, their ceilings blackened by copal smoke as priests performed pared-down versions of the old rites. Spanish chronicles tell of soldiers stumbling upon these hidden chambers, finding walls painted with astral diagrams and floors slick with blood that wasn't human, at least not entirely. Jaguars, eagles, and even venomous snakes were bled in precise sequences, their life force offered as substitute currency now that mass human sacrifice was impossible. One account describes a captured priest shattering his own fingernails against the cave walls, insisting each drop of his blood now carried the weight of 1,000 missing hearts. Archaeologists have uncovered chilling evidence of these underground ceremonies. In caves near Chapultepec, flint knives were found wedged into stalagmites at perfect right angles, a recreation of the Templo Mayor's alignment with celestial north. Even more telling were the child-sized footprints preserved in millennia-old mud, their paths forming spiral patterns matching the Tonalpohualli calendar's sacred geometry. These weren't random scribbles, they were celestial maps walked into existence by bare feet in total darkness. The rituals grew increasingly desperate as famine and plague ravaged the survivors. A codex hidden in a sealed lava tube depicts priests sacrificing Spanish mastiffs, the war dogs that had mauled Aztec warriors, believing the invaders' beasts carried fragments of their master's destructive power. Another shows a blindfolded noblewoman bleeding into a bowl of quicksilver, the liquid metal thought to mirror Huitzilopochtli's dying light. What makes these hidden rites uniquely tragic is their mathematical precision. Crude tallies scratched onto cave walls track lunar cycles between 1630 and 1640, each mark accompanied by a glyph estimating how much closer the end had crept without proper sacrifices. One column calculates the deficit in units of hearts, over 50,000 by the last entry. The priests weren't just mourning their lost empire, they were watching the universe's fuel gauge hit empty. The final acts were pure poetry of despair. In a cavern beneath Iztaccíhuatl volcano, explorers found 7 skeletons arranged in a star pattern, their rib cages cradling lumps of volcanic glass carved into miniature suns. Forensic analysis revealed they'd ingested enough morning glory seeds to induce visions before flaying their own faces, a final attempt to become living mirrors, reflecting the 5th sun's last light back to its source. Nearby, someone had scrawled a single phrase in mixed Nahuatl and broken Spanish. "We kept it alive longer than we should have." These caves weren't shelters, they were intensive care units for a dying cosmos, where the last priests performed triage on eternity itself. Every cut, every chant, every drop of blood was a protest against the inevitable, a refusal to let the universe forget it had once been tended by human hands. When the final guardian died alone in the dark, his last act wasn't a prayer for mercy. It was lighting a candle made of Spanish wax and his own fat, ensuring at least one flame still flickered when the gods came to collect their debt. The drums that echo through Mexican streets during Dia de los Muertos aren't just celebrations, they're the faint heartbeat of an ancient cosmic bargain. Today's marigold-strewn altars and sugar skulls may seem worlds apart from the Aztecs' flaying knives, but peel back the layers, and you'll find the same urgent logic pulsing beneath. Those vibrant ofrendas aren't merely memorials, they're carefully calibrated portals mirroring the Aztec belief that the dead could cross back into our world when the celestial gates creaked open each year. The marigold's sharp scent, a modern substitute for the copal smoke that once guided spirits, chosen because its golden hue matches the Aztec description of the afterlife as a field of perpetual sunlight. Even the playful Calavera poems mocking death carry whispers of old defiance, a way to stare into the abyss and laugh, just as their ancestors did when they dressed skeletons in finery and paraded them through Tenochtitlan. But the connections run deeper than symbolism. In remote villages surrounding Popocatépetl, farmers still climb the volcano's lower slopes during droughts, tossing cornmeal and live chickens into steaming fissures. When asked why, they'll shrug and say "para que no se enoje," so it doesn't get angry. It sounds like superstition until you spot the pattern. These offerings peak in years when the volcano rumbles, just as the Aztecs once interpreted tremors as Zucotl's hunger. Modern volcanologists roll their eyes, but the ritual's endurance suggests something profound. A folk memory of when humanity saw itself as part of an ongoing negotiation with destructive forces rather than their helpless victim. The most startling survivals lurk in Catholic conversions. In Colula, where the Spanish built a church atop the largest pyramid in Mesoamerica, locals still celebrate Mass with jars of pulque, the same fermented drink Aztec priests used to commune with the gods. The Virgin Mary statues draped in flower garlands. Look closer, their necklaces are strung with jade beads identical to those found in Tlaloc's child sacrifices. Even the communion wafer's transformation into divine flesh carries eerie parallels to the Aztec practice of shaping amaranth paste into god effigies before consumption. Scholars call this syncretism, but it's more like cultural alchemy, the transmutation of old beliefs into new vessels. When Oaxacan artisans mold chocolate into skulls, they're unknowingly replicating the cacao-tainted blood drinks of Tezcatlipoca's cult. The papier-mâché Judas figures burned during Holy Week, their hollow bellies once held the sins of a community, just like the Aztec new fire bundles. Even Halloween's trick-or-treat routine finds its precursor in Mictlantecuhtlic's festivals, where children were given edible effigies to appease the Lady of the Dead. Perhaps the most poignant survival is one few recognize. Every November 2nd, millions bite into pan de muerto, the sweet bread of the dead, adorned with bone-shaped dough. What few realize is that the original recipe included amaranth flour mixed with sacrificial blood, baked into shapes of Huitzilopochtli's dismembered sister. The modern version has sanitized the ingredients, but the ritual remains, consuming the divine to keep the world alive. These aren't empty traditions, they're the subconscious reflexes of a civilization that refused to let its worldview die. The Aztecs may have fallen, but their cosmic urgency endures, disguised as festival whimsy. When a grandmother arranges her deceased husband's favorite meal on an altar, she's not just remembering him, she's maintaining the universe's delicate balance, one lovingly placed tortilla at a time. The bones of the old rituals are still there, they've just learned to dance in new skin. For centuries, Spanish chronicles painted Aztec sacrifice as wanton butchery, until the earth itself began to contradict them. When archaeologists in 1978 uncovered the Templo Maya's hidden offerings, they didn't just find bones, they found receipts. Layer after layer of meticulously arranged remains told a different story, one where ritual wasn't chaotic cruelty but a precision science. Take the skull racks. Spanish accounts described them as grotesque trophies, but forensic analysis revealed something startling. The skulls weren't haphazardly piled, they were threaded onto wooden beams in intricate lattice patterns, their positioning mirroring the Aztec calendar's sacred mathematics. Some even had drill holes suggesting they'd been periodically removed and handled, likely for rituals recalculating cosmic balances. Then there's the matter of scale. Friar Diego Duran claimed 20,000 were sacrificed in a single ceremony, a number modern archaeology proves impossible. Excavations at the Templo Maya show precise clusters of remains corresponding to specific festivals, with chemical dating proving sacrifices occurred in controlled waves, not the endless rivers of blood described in colonial texts. Even the tools tell a truth the Spanish missed. Their accounts fixated on obsidian blades, but recent scans reveal something more sophisticated. Flint knives with micro-serrated edges designed for clean, surgical cuts, their blades worn smooth from repeated ceremonial use. These weren't weapons of mass slaughter, they were instruments of sacred craft. The most damning evidence against colonial bias lies in the victims themselves. Spanish sources insisted sacrifices targeted random war captives, yet isotopic analysis of teeth and bones tells another story. Many remains show signs of prolonged malnutrition followed by months of rich feeding, proof they'd been fattened like ritual livestock. Others reveal healed injuries from previous battles, confirming they were seasoned warriors prized for their spiritual potency. Some child sacrifices even had jade beads deliberately placed in their mouths, a detail absent from Spanish records but matching indigenous codices that describe jade as the stone of life needed to guide souls. Perhaps the most revelatory find was the flayed god chamber. Beneath the Templo Maya, archaeologists uncovered a sealed room containing flint knives still embedded in layers of human skin residue, physical proof of Tlaloc rituals. Spanish chroniclers had dismissed skin wearing as barbaric theater, but biochemical analysis showed the hides underwent elaborate preservation with plant oils, suggesting they were treated as sacred relics. Even the room's orientation mattered, its doorway aligned with the sunrise on the spring equinox, turning the entire space into a cosmological timepiece. The disconnect between Spanish accounts and material evidence becomes starkest with the new fire ceremony. Colonial texts describe it as a mass panic with priests frantically relighting flames. But digs at the Hill of the Star uncovered astronomically aligned observation platforms and carefully spaced braziers, proving the ceremony was a calibrated reenactment of myth. The so-called panic was likely a choreographed performance, the Aztec equivalent of a space launch countdown. What emerges from the dirt isn't the blood-drunk savages of colonial propaganda, but a civilization that treated cosmic maintenance with the precision of Swiss watchmakers. Every cut, every offering, every arranged bone spoke a language the conquerors couldn't comprehend, one where violence wasn't an end, but a terrible arithmetic of survival. The Spanish saw chaos, the stones reveal calculus. Modern scholars stand divided at the edge of this blood-stained history. Some see a barbaric cult of death, while others decipher a complex theology written in veins and fire. The rift runs deeper than academic debate. It cuts to the heart of how we measure civilizations. Do we judge the Aztecs by today's moral compass, or do we step into their universe, a world where the sun might literally vanish without enough human hearts to fuel it? One camp argues that ritualized violence can never be justified, no matter the cultural context. They point to the sheer scale, the thousands of sacrifices described in colonial accounts, even if modern archaeology suggests lower numbers. To these critics, the Aztecs weren't just different, they crossed a line into systemic cruelty, particularly in ceremonies involving children or flayed skins. Contemporary human rights frameworks offer no wiggle room. Ritualized killing is killing, full stop. But another perspective emerges from anthropologists like David Carrasco, who frame Aztec practices as part of a sophisticated cosmic economy. Imagine living in a universe where gods didn't just demand worship, they required literal sustenance, and the stakes were everyone's survival. In that light, sacrifice wasn't murder, it was a sacred duty, as non-negotiable as paying taxes or maintaining a power grid today. The Aztecs didn't revel in suffering, they bore it as a collective responsibility, with nobles bleeding themselves just as fiercely as they spilled others' blood. The debate turns especially thorny when we examine who volunteered. Spanish accounts describe captured warriors embracing their fate, believing death on the stone granted them divine status. Modern trauma psychology might call this coerced acceptance, but Aztec poetry suggests genuine resolve. Verses penned by nobles speak of precious water, given freely to nourish the gods. Even child sacrifices were sometimes accompanied by mothers who considered their loss a grim honor, ensuring rain for entire communities. Archaeology complicates easy condemnation. Chemical analysis of victims' bones reveals some were given pulque, a ritual beer before death, not to dull pain but to induce euphoria. Others show signs of prolonged care, healed injuries, rich diets in their final months. These weren't disposable victims, they were prepared with meticulous reverence, their bodies transformed into metaphysical currency. The ultimate challenge lies in our own hypocrisy. Modern societies balk at Aztec bloodshed while ignoring systemic violence in factories, wars, or prison systems just as ritualized, if less overt. Scholar James Maffei argues that human sacrifice wasn't uniquely barbaric, it was simply more honest about the costs of maintaining order. When an Aztec priest cut out a heart, he acknowledged the debt. Today, we outsource suffering to distant supply chains and drone strikes, pretending no blood stains our hands. Yet, even within Mesoamerican studies, voices like Inga Clendenon's urge caution against romanticizing. She notes how imperial expansion turned sacrifice into political theater, a way to terrorize rivals and extract tribute. The line between cosmic duty and state terror blurs when captives arrive in chains from conquered cities. Perhaps the most unsettling truth is that both perspectives hold weight. The Aztecs built a civilization that could chart Venus with uncanny precision, yet also crack open a child's chest to stop a drought. Their rituals were neither mindless nor monstrous. They were the product of a world so alien to ours that simple judgment feels inadequate. To truly understand them, we must stand in that terrifying middle ground where awe and horror shake hands, and where the echo of a priest's blade reminds us how fragile even the most brilliant civilizations can be when staring into the abyss. The Aztecs may have lived 500 years ago, but their terror mirrors our own, that gnawing sense the world is teetering on the edge, and only desperate acts can pull it back. Today, we don't carve hearts from chests to feed the sun, but we stockpile bunkers, rally for dying ecosystems, and scan the news for signs of collapse. The packaging has changed, but the impulse remains, the belief that survival demands sacrifice. Climate activists chain themselves to pipelines, billionaires build vaults for their DNA, and scientists debate geoengineering, all variations on the same ancient theme. We're still trying to reset the universe, just with carbon credits instead of obsidian blades. There's a quiet irony in how modern preppers obsess over bug-out bags filled with protein bars and ammunition. The Aztecs had their own version, nobles hoarding jade beads and ceremonial spines, not for personal survival, but to buy the cosmos more time. Both rituals spring from the same primal fear, the suspicion that civilization hangs by a thread, and ordinary life is just a fragile mask over chaos. The difference: the Aztecs didn't hide their desperation in suburban basements. They turned it into art, architecture, and sacred mathematics, their terror etched in stone rather than Reddit forums. Consider the parallels. When Greta Thunberg declared, "Our house is on fire," she channeled the same urgency as an Aztec priest tracking the Tonalpohualli's ominous dates. Both see apocalypse not as myth, but as a spreadsheet calibrated, inevitable unless interrupted by human will. Modern climate accords even resemble the Aztecs' tribute system, nations negotiating who must bleed the most to keep the machine running. Yet for all our satellites and summits, we've lost something the Aztecs understood viscerally: that sacrifice only works when it's personal. They didn't outsource their violence. Emperors bled alongside slaves because the gods demanded equity in suffering. Perhaps that's why their rituals unnerve us so deeply. They force a question we've spent centuries avoiding: what would you really give up to stop the end? Not just your plastic straws or gasoline, but your comfort, your safety, your body. The Aztecs answered without flinching. They flayed their own skin, drowned their children, and wore death as a second face. Our modern bargains seem timid by comparison: recycling bins and solar panels, gestures that cost us nothing of our flesh. So here's the uncomfortable truth the ruins whisper: every civilization gets the apocalypse it deserves. The Aztecs met theirs with blood-soaked precision, believing they could trade lives for time. We face ours with hashtags and half measures, hoping technology will pardon us from the reckoning. But the universe doesn't care about good intentions, only balances. As the last Aztec priests starved in their caves, still counting the missing sacrifices, they left behind a warning we've yet to heed. Extinction doesn't come from failing to predict the end. It comes from failing to pay for it.